Welcome to the Brave Talk Show. Bold topics, brave women, nothing is off the table. Today, we are talking about why you need therapy. Don't get offended. Just listen to us.
Okay.
We have a great episode today.
Oh my gosh. So we need therapy. All right. I want to hear, first of all, Brittany, why you think we all need therapy.
I think she was speaking like not to us.
I think
Right.
Robin, Teresa, and Vanessa specifically need therapy. And this was the only way that I could get it through to them. Was like, I'm just going to do an episode in general.
Yeah.
And then maybe some
Passive
things will.
aggressive.
I know. I do think Brittany picks topics when she's going through sometimes. Is that right, Brittany?
Yes.
Yes, definitely. Yes.
It might be a little
for me.
personal. The reason why I say there's a couple things that I wanted to go over in this episode. And one that I think everybody needs therapy because we all struggle. We all have things that we need help with. And to think that you don't need therapy or that you'll just tough through it and, grin and bear it or whatever your philosophy is, you're wrong. And there's different forms of therapy. I don't want everybody to think that they need to go and sign up and pay a therapist $100 an hour, which you very well might need. There have been several times in my life where that has been 100% worth it. And there have been times when I haven't been able to afford it and I've found help to help me afford it because it was that important to me. But I'm at a time right now where I use friends as therapists a lot. And I use different things and I know how to use all the tools that the therapists have taught me. Journaling is a type of therapy for me. I know how to participate in therapy without going and sitting on a couch. And I also have therapists on speed dial where if I need a session, I can go in and be like, hey, I'm really struggling with this. Can you help me see it objectively? Can I vent to you? Let's work through this. But I really, really believe that every woman needs some type of therapy in her life, whether that's talk therapy or journaling or meeting with a therapist. We all have mental health and it should be a focus for everybody.
Let's start maybe really quick by everyone briefly discussing if they've been through therapy, what kind, and if it helped. Because I think we first need to break the taboo of like, you're broken if you go to therapy or there's something wrong with you. I'm a huge advocate of therapy and I think it's generationally becoming more acceptable. But like even a couple of years ago, I remember I'd be like, I'm in therapy. And people I loved would be like, why'd you tell people that? Shh, keep it quiet. I'm like, why don't you go to therapy?
Yeah.
Like you're the problem.
The fact that you said that I should be quiet about it is a good sign.
You need
Problem in
therapy.
itself.
Yeah. So Teresa, have you been to therapy?
Yeah, I have been to therapy twice. I tried a third time, but I'll briefly go over what happened with there. But I was in therapy as a child. I was molested when I was years old, and I told my mom when I was 7, and she immediately was like, got me to a counselor ASAP. So that was my first experience with a therapist, and this lady was wonderful. And it was a lot of play therapy. She had me do the Barbie dolls, and then I had to like show all the things, and then she would play games with me and so forth. And I don't even think I knew at that time that I was going to therapy. But now as an adult looking back, I'm like, oh, my mom took me to a therapist. And then in my early 20s, I was struggling with some depression, and I've gone through some depression in and out of my whole life. What I thought was depression and some issues that I was having. And I went to the therapist and he basically told me I didn't need any help. He was like, honestly, it was a really weird scenario, but he was like, good news is, you don't need therapy. Bad news is you don't need therapy, that kind of a thing. So nothing happened again until really about a year or so ago, I decided to get myself into therapy. I was, my husband and I were fighting a lot. Cancer had come in and it was causing some conflicts in all sorts of areas of our lives. And my husband basically just said, like, you need therapy. And meanwhile, I'm like, I need therapy. You need therapy,
I've done couples therapy. I haven't done individual therapy. But yeah, I did couples like with my husband. We went, I think it's like beginning of marriage. Like I think we've been married for like 4 years. And then it's kind of like getting to know each other where we're just like, okay, there's this like a stop like this. We're not communicating. We want different things. Like, and we know we love each other. We know we don't want a divorce. Like that was never been on the table. So it's kind of like, that was kind of like I was still in school, like doing like we were just young and we were just like, okay. And then we just like, okay, let's go see a therapist. Like we just had a lot of things going on. And then it was like, we got the tools. And even now, every now and then I was like, yeah, I remember when he said, like, and those are the things that have like helped us throughout our marriage. So I am a great, like, of course, with my job, I'm a psychology major. So I believe in therapy. Like therapy is a plus. It's never a shame.
Right. The more I like start thinking about my timeline with therapy, I'm like, wow, I've been to more than I thought. My first experience with therapy was actually as a child in 7th grade. I had debilitating anxiety around death, and it started from 9/11. And I just thought everyone around me would die at any point in time. And so I couldn't go to school. I would be worried my parents were going to die. So my parents put me into child therapy, and same thing, we played and I worked through those feelings. Fast forward, when I was 18, 19, after my sexual assault, I was very encouraged to do therapy. I didn't want to do it, thought it wouldn't help, didn't want to tell anyone any details. Basically forced into therapy, and saving grace. So glad that I was forced into that. I actually only did that for about 6 months, and then never had any more experience with therapy until about 10 years later. My husband at the time, him and I went to an addiction therapist for him. And we did that for a little while. And then about 3 years ago, my former spouse, we started couples therapy and individual therapy. And obviously I'm not married anymore, so we're not doing couples therapy, but I still continue. I go twice a month, and I transitioned out of talk therapy now into EMDR. And that's something I really love. And basically it's going back through your brain and finding traumatic moments, or moments that you think are traumatic, which is shocking because you would think it'd be like my sexual assault, my divorce, like big things like that, which are, but they have you like make a trauma timeline. And it was actually really small things that I'm still holding on to as traumatic from like my childhood, like little things, like when my little sister had cancer, like I didn't know how traumatic that was on me. And like, just basically they take you back, your mind takes you where it needs to go. And you kind of go back to these events. You can see or recant details that you didn't know. So it can be traumatic in itself, but then you rewire the event to be a positive event. And so I love, love, love EMDR right now. That's awesome. What I'm doing.
So I've actually done EMDR as well. There was a traumatic experience when I first got married, and I replayed it every single day for probably 10 to 13 years.
Oh my gosh.
And it affected everything. Like if I thought about it, I would start crying. Like it was that traumatic for me. And so I've been to therapy several times as well. And one of the times my therapist was like, let's try EMDR. And I was like, oh, I want to do it for this event. And she was like, okay, well, the goal is to rewire it and take it down. So the best way I can describe it is that event for me was a 10 on the scale. Like it affected every day, and I was constantly trying to fight it. Where after I did EMDR, it's now like a 2.
That's so cool.
Where I can still think about it. And if I really think about it, I'm like, oh, I can see why that was so hurtful to me and why that was so traumatic, but it doesn't stir up any emotions. I don't cry about it. I don't, like, it literally processed it for me. And now I can look at it objectively and be like, I feel so bad for Brittany, who had to deal with that because that was a terrible moment in her life.
Yeah.
But I don't have to relive that moment anymore.
It's almost like when I hear you talking, like you're friends with Brittany, that Brittany then. And like now you're seeing it as a sympathetic, not apathetic, but a sympathetic friend. And it's not you anymore that's being hurt.
Yeah. And that's the power of processing your emotions and not running from them and like letting them teach you. And just the mind is amazing, and processing them is great.
And I think the thing about it, like I always, when I do groups and stuff like that, I always says, therapy, the way that it helps, think of all your traumas like that you've had. It's like a cut, like, right? When you get a cut and you cut your finger, what are you going to do with it? Like if you just take it and put a Band-Aid on it and don't take care of it, it's going to get infected, right? If you just like put a Band-Aid every time it just start bleeding, you just put a Band-Aid. And sometimes that's what we do with traumas, right? We just like, let's put it under, let's put it here. And so that's what EMDR is doing. It's going to go back some of those things because you just barely put a Band-Aid on it. It may be healed, but that scar is still there. And every time you see that scar, you're like, oh my gosh, like it just triggers your body. But if you have that cut and you clean it and you take the process, like if you have to go to the doctor, you get stitches, you really take care of it. It will heal, but then there will be a scar still. But when you look at that scar, it's a reminder of like how far I've come, and you process it and you use those tools and those things that the doctor had teach you to clean that wound. It's just like that trauma.
Yeah.
Because you take the time and you process it and you heal it. And will it go away? No. But when it comes and those triggers come, it's like, oh, okay, yes, I remember that. But I'm better now because of the work that I've done.
I think what you mentioned about the scar, I think is really important in that the truly healed probably would be a scar that doesn't hurt any longer.
Yes.
If it's still hurting, if you still have a nervous system response to it when you're thinking, whether it's crying or anger or anything that you feel like, oh, I need to push that down. I need to push that away. I don't want to feel that. It's uncomfortable. That's a sign that you need to still deal with it.
Yeah.
I would say.
I think that's so good because so much shame. Like I felt shame for years whenever I would think about it. Like I would bring it up and my husband would be like, you're still dealing with that? And he would get frustrated with me and I would get frustrated with me and be like, why can't I get over this? Why is it still upsetting me? Why is it still such a big deal? And it was really, I should have just met myself with compassion. And I really should have just asked myself, why is it still so traumatic? That means I need to process it. That means I need some work to do, right? Instead of feeling the shame and the guilt and trying to push it down and like get over it, I needed to actually open it up. That's one of the things you do in EMDR is you do open it up.
Yeah, it's kind of like a little bit of a can of worms sometimes because like I also have had a lot more trauma resurface 15 years later after my sexual assault that I totally thought was done. And it's scary to be like, crap, I thought I was healed. Now I'm almost like backstepping, like, but it's not. It's just you never got progress in certain places and you don't want to be plagued with that. But it can reopen things. And so when I first started therapy about 3 years ago, it almost felt like things got worse for a minute. We got them out on the table and then you kind of, go through it all. But therapy, you guys, if you are a person thinking in your head, like, I don't need therapy, I'm going to tell you right now, you're the person who needs therapy. You are. I met a guy the other day. In fact, I was at a really beautiful breathwork class. And I was asking him and I was like, have you ever done breath work? And he's like, no, this is my first time that I've ever like done self-growth. And he's like, I started meditating. I'm like, that's awesome. And I was like, what do you do for a living? He's like, oh, I'm not a police officer. Excuse me. He's like, I'm a fireman. I'm like, oh man, that's like way traumatic. And he's like, no, actually I don't have any trauma. And I looked at him. I'm like, oh, you for sure have trauma. I'm like, you see like dead kids and like you work graves and like all this thing. And he dead seriously, he's like, I literally have no trauma from my job. And I was like, I don't want to be the one to tell you. And I'm just like the person, like a stranger. Like, and I was just like, but you probably have more trauma than you even know. And like, you need therapy. And he dead serious was like, no, like I don't. And I'm like, okay.
And I think what that looks like for some people, and we have like I see people like that all the time, is because like it sounds weird because when we say everybody needs therapy, and I think what we have to look at too, the people like that, like that's a great example because there's people that are built. It's not like where like I don't know what you said earlier, where it's just like those things bring back memory, and it's like I have to be. A lot of us sometimes we have to look at what we've been giving. People ask me all the time, how do you do your job, right? Because you would think with the things that I see, especially lately, like it's been crazy, right? Especially in our own backyard here in Utah and things are going. It's not like we're desensitized to it. I think some people, because they choose that work, like the firemen, like it's not like they're not seeing trauma. It's just like they've learned of how to process. Like there's different kind of therapy. There's people that just process it like right there. Like they see it and they're like, oh man, that's hard. And then it's like a process. And
so my dad was a firefighter growing up. He's since retired. But he saw awful things. And there, every now and then he, especially since I'm older now, he'll tell me some stories. But he has said across the board that firehouses are comedy places and a lot of crudeness. Actually, that's how they deal with it. That's how they cope with it, is they joke, they're crude. You know what I mean? Like that's how kind of they're across the board, not everybody, but the firehouses in general, you could say that's
how they have to do the job. And so they have to kind of process and find a way to process. And that's why I love in the beginning where you say there's so many different type of therapy. So if you can't afford the $100 an hour, if you can't do that, like there's ways to get help.
Like hiking.
So, exactly.
Hiking is a form of therapy for me.
Yeah, you've learned that about the outdoors. But Robin, when I was just thinking about when you talked about the firefighter that you were talking to, because I know that, now since you're, post-divorce and you're in the dating kind of experience. I know if I had to go back to dating right now, my requirement would be that whoever I was dating, like before I even consider dating you, have you been to therapy at this point? Because if you haven't, like, I don't want any of all the, like, you need to come to a place of recognizing wherever you're at in your life. Like, there's things, I don't care what past divorces you've had or what, like, whose fault it was. Like, own your stuff and own where you need to grow. Otherwise, I don't think I would.
Oh, I agree with that.
That's 100%. Like before, it's like, what do you like to do? What are your hobbies? I'm like, what's your Enneagram type? Have you done therapy? Are you codependent? Like, 100%. But
what's your package?
Yeah, exactly. With what Vanessa was saying, though, I am actually dating someone, you guys, and he is a former police officer.
Okay.
And police officer, firefighter, similar, see the same things. And I can tell you just by getting to know him that what they thought they were coping with at the time, like seeing a dead child or a very, traumatic crash, like with the laughter or going home coping, just drinking alcohol or like going within. That's not coping.
Oh, no.
And so you need to have so when I was talking to this firefighter, I'm like, so how do you like cope with that? He's like, I just don't feel anything.
That is coping. That's not healing.
Yeah, exactly. And he said, I've seen so many dead kids. I don't even feel anymore. And I was like, dude, that's traumatic. Like, you might be numbing out, but like, it's still in your
He
body.
might be disassociated.
And that's what I was thinking too.
Yeah.
Because and I hear what you're saying, because you have those people that see those things and they go home and they drink and it's called unhealthy coping skills.
Yes.
There's healthy coping skills and there's unhealthy coping skills. So definitely use those healthy coping skills.
A lot of us use busyness as a coping skill. We're just like
Workaholism.
keep going, so we don't have time to think about it. I know
and
my husband, he's listening.
Yeah.
You work too much.
Yeah.
So one thing that I find interesting with me going to therapy so often throughout the years, there have been counselors where I've really meshed with, and then there have been counselors where I haven't, and so it's been short-lived. I've been like, this one just doesn't get me. And so I always advise everybody to try out, test out a couple therapists. If you don't feel like you gel with your therapist, that they're a safe place or that you can really trust what their advice that you're giving you, to try, shop around, find a different therapist. Don't give up on therapy altogether. Just shop around. My 15-year-old is in therapy right now. And we've tried a couple different therapists. Another thing to look for in therapy is somebody who gives you tools. Don't go to somebody who just lets you talk and vent. That's just an expensive friend. You need somebody who's going to give you tools. And I actually had a therapist. So after my third baby, I had severe postpartum depression. When I was suicidal, that was when my husband was like, okay, you need help. We couldn't afford the help, so we reached out, and actually our church paid for me to go to counseling. I found an amazing counselor who was like a godsend to me. She was amazing. But after working with her for a little while, she was like, Brittany, I think we're done. I think I've helped you as much as I can. I've given you the tools. You've exercised those tools. I know that you know how to use those tools, and I don't think you need me anymore. And that was awesome. It was like I was graduating almost, where it wasn't that my mental health was all solved. It wasn't that I was completely healed. It was just that I didn't need her anymore. She had taught me everything that I needed, and I could do those on my own. She's like, you have my number. Call me when you need it. And I totally would. There were times, 6 months later, where something would be activated in me, where I'd be like traumatized again or just feeling really emotional, something like, I need to go talk to Joan. So I would text her, set up an appointment. We'd go do a session. She'd remind me of the tools and then I would leave again. And that's where I am at my stage right now, where I'm like, okay, I have some therapist phone numbers. I can go talk to them, but I'm not going daily. And I think that's such a great therapist to teach you the tools.
Yeah, it's a great therapist.
And then be like, okay,
now go practice them.
Yeah.
Let them go.
Yeah. And know that you can't, I was going consistently every week because everything was so turbulent in my life and moving quick. But now it's kind of the same thing. I have a set appointment for once a month, but if I miss it, she'll be like, are you feeling good? We need to do 2 next month. And so that's a great therapist to find too. That's cool with you, needing some time. You want to come back for a month and leave again. If someone's like, it's standing appointment only, and that might be a red flag.
Yeah. When I had my counselor that I was seeing a year ago, it was mostly talk therapy. He gave me some advice for sure. But I wouldn't necessarily say like a toolbox, so to speak. But what I'm learning is after listening to you guys, I want to do EMDR. Is that how you say it?
EMDR.
EMDR. And then my husband was doing EMDR, but then his counselor at some point said, I think we don't need to do much more anymore. That I want to start doing what's called DBT, dialectical behavior therapy, with my husband. And I'm like, what is this? So I was looking at it, and it's really helpful for a lot of people. Basically, it helps you have these tools to help you figure out what you're feeling, whether or not you're in a real crisis situation. And now we even use the words in our house. So like my whole family, we're all a bunch of overreactors. Everything's a huge deal. So the new phrase in our house is, this is not a crisis. Or, is this a crisis? Like, really? Is it really a crisis or not? And then recognizing, okay, I'm acting like this is a crisis, but it's not. So like, I need to calm down, right? But it's just helping you with like being mindful of what you're feeling, being aware of it, kind of recognizing, am I thinking in black and white? Am I thinking in extreme? Where is a more balanced approach to what I'm doing? And there's just a few other things that have been really helpful. So my husband started doing that, and I saw huge differences in him, in the way that he reacted to things, in the way that he saw things. And I just got a little book for kids to start just trying to teach it and practice it with my own kids, because I feel like our whole family needs it. Including myself.
And I think the thing is what you said earlier, it's about like therapy. You can't push therapy on people. I think that was one of your topic. Then if you're looking at that, DBT is the best way also to do that. Like a lot of our kids in like in foster care, they do a lot of DBT because it's behavioral. It's also like self-accountability to look at within, right?
Kate, wait, can you tell us what DBT is?
Well, I don't have the full scientific. Maybe Vanessa knows more. I just know it's called dialectical behavioral therapy. And dialectical in that it helps people who have extreme emotions and who tend to have like black and white thinking, like everything's either awesome or everything is horrible. And so typically people who have had traumatic backgrounds might have those types of feelings because of just their background. So it doesn't surprise me that a lot of kids in foster care have to go through it. My husband had a really terrible upbringing. And so he struggles with black and white thinking, and everything's either awesome or everything's horrible. Like, it's just how it is. So if you have kids with a lot of extreme emotions, or you feel like you have strong emotions that are sometimes hard to really like just control yourself with, and just calm down and like really look at yourself, like look at the situation and respond rather than react. That's what this is for. That's my
Google says dialectical behavior therapy is a type of talking therapy. It's based on cognitive behavior therapy, but it's specially adapted for people who feel emotions very intensely. The aim of DBT is to help you understand and accept your difficult feelings.
So it's a lot of like, it's like, it's really good. Like, and as we talk, I think it was popular before. I think now everybody's doing EMDR, but I think EMDR is more like trauma-based to make you go under the layer and deal with the childhood. So that's a difference. It's just kind of like the childhood, EMDR, get to the deep so then you can fix what's happening.
But this is more of like,
so this is more like your emotions and your feelings, your behavior. So if you're like, you have kids and they're like, oh my gosh, like I hate this, like your kids are just over, and it's like, then it helps them deal with this emotion, recognize where that emotion is coming and how, like I say, it's always like very black or white for them. Like, oh my gosh. So it kind of like bring them down to where it's just like, deal with that emotion. And that's why you'll see, and I love it because it really does great work. So I love that. And I think when you're thinking like, oh, don't push people to do therapy, it kind of like that self-accountability to like, let me deal with it instead of putting my emotion in other people and being like, this is your fault, this is why we're like this. But it's more like, oh, I need to take a pause and realize that. And those are the tools that they kind of teach them. Like, instead of attacking others, it's like, okay, I need to.
And don't freak out if you start Googling this, because when you start Googling it, you'll learn that it originally started as a therapy for people with borderline personality. So like when you see it, you might be like, well, I'm not borderline, I don't need this. It started as that, and it's still a very helpful tool for people with borderline. I actually have a friend who when she practices it, like when she's really good, she doesn't have borderline symptoms at all. She's able to really control it. But then they started finding that it was helpful for people with other types of emotional conditions like post-traumatic, PTSD, even narcissism, like people who really want to work on narcissism, it can help with that. And a few other different kinds. But honestly, like I'm looking at it, and I don't think when I was looking at all of the categories that it practices, I don't really think I need all of them. But there's a couple that I think even though I don't have borderline, I'm not a narcissist, I don't have PTSD, there's still, some of them are still useful even for me.
Yeah.
But all of them are useful for someone who definitely has.
Well, I just think that sounds amazing for me because I feel emotions very strongly.
Yeah.
I was just talking to my husband the other day. Like, he was like, why are you so upset? Why can't I get upset at you? Like, why does that affect you so much? That was our argument, right? He was upset at me and then I just like crumbled. And I was like, I am just a strong emotional person. Like, I love deeply and I also get offended deeply. Like, it affects me
Girlfriend,
physically.
you and I are like spirit sisters on that.
Yeah, totally. I feel the same.
It
Yeah.
is,
So that would be great.
It's funny that you just brought that because I literally just in one of my group, like I talked about DBT, and this is like the sixth. I had this little wheel, so I just pull it up. Like, this is the sixth thing, like the theory behind it, like what DBT can help us. So, like, emotion regulation is a big one. Distress tolerance, like, so like you said, you not always need to be like, oh my gosh, like, you know, always in
How do you
distress.
handle irritating situations?
Yes. Interpersonal effectiveness, change orientation strategy. So like how like changes and stuff like that happening, and then it's still like help with mental health issues. So that's also the biggest part of it because it also bring it all together with like the mental health. You're dealing with all this emotion that's coming through. So acceptance of situations. So when things are coming in, how to just accept it because you can't control everything. So it's really, I love, like, if you have to ask me, I love it better than EMDR, but it's a great piece.
Well, I'm going to go
I
sign
know.
up for
I'm gonna
DBT.
switch over to that.
Yeah. And I think one thing to resources, because I think a lot of people kind of, because we talk about therapy, like go to therapy, people probably like, how do I get therapy? I think the biggest thing I always tell people, like, as you sign up for your health insurance and you know, like, I need to get therapy, like literally make sure that sometime you're there, like some health insurance is starting to offer mental health, resources. And
Thank
also,
God.
yeah. And then 211 for Utah, I guess, all general, like the 211, like you can call like, Wasatch Behavioral, Salt Lake Behavioral, they do like a where you call if you feel like you're starting to get stressed and things like they can like just to kind of like a quick like, hey, talk to us and see what's going on. And just to kind of like, okay, this is kind of a little bit of a tool. Like they can help with those things. And it's very affordable. So
There's also books. Like, obviously, I think counseling is ideal, right? But for those of you who can't necessarily afford counseling or therapy, there are some books out there that I think are really helpful. You can go to Amazon, and I did get my brother, he was in jail for a while, and I was like, well, I'm going to get him a book while he's in there. And it was a dialectical therapy, dialectical behavioral therapy workbook. And it walks you through a ton of different exercises to kind of look at your life. I'm like, you got some time to be thinking about your life, so you can go through it. But there's also another book, and I've talked about this on other podcasts before. Dr. Nicole LaPera has a workbook called How to Do the Work. And then she just came out with another one called How to Meet Yourself. I haven't read the second one, so I can't vouch for how good that book is. But How to Do the Work is full of tools, full of really great tools to help you manage your emotions, dig into some of your like traumas and kind of figure out how to control your feelings when you're going through that, all of that. So I think it's a really useful tool to anybody.
And speaking of which, I actually wrote a self-compassion workbook that does all of those things that you were just talking about.
Nice.
And I just reprinted them and I'm relaunching them. So you can go to my website and go buy it right now.
What is your website? Tell everybody.
So it's getouttheregirl.com.
Okay. My last thought for therapy is sometimes, like, this might have felt overwhelming to some, like, which therapy do I need? Do I need this or EMDR or marriage or addiction?
Yeah.
Just start with talking, because I think sometimes therapy is actually just getting it out of your body, saying it, and you understanding how you feel. It's almost like you're therapying yourself, and it's just like someone needs to be there to facilitate it.
Well, even if you don't have a friend, journal it.
Yeah, but like sitting with someone, a therapist, and you're like, well, where do I start? Just get a basic therapist and just say you want to start, discover yourself, release traumas. Then they can point you in the direction of like what you specifically need. But just by telling them like, so what's bothering you? Well, I'm just feeling really disconnected from my spouse. Like just saying it out loud and you being able to hear what is actually bothering you is going to give you clarity on what you need to work.
Yeah. And there's a website called betterhelp.com. I think that's what it is. And you can go in there and kind of like click what you're looking for, and then it will match you with like therapists in your area. Awesome. So then you don't go sit with somebody and be like, this is what I'm doing. And they're like, oh, sorry, I can't. Like you go in there and do like a little bit of an assessment and find like who's gonna, because a great if you want to have great therapy, you have to have a great therapist. Because if you don't match with your therapist, it is not going to go well.
It's just expensive. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the point of this episode was to get you thinking about your own mental health and to get curious. Is therapy something that you might need to invest in? Are there different modes of therapy that you should invest in? But there is something that you should be doing for your mental health, and we encourage you to do it.